It was one of those still afternoons when the air itself seems to rest. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and every now and then a distant car rolled past the house before the quiet returned. Maggie sat on the living room sofa with a half-read magazine in her lap. She wasn't really reading, just turning pages, pretending to occupy herself. The house was neat, warm, and beautifully kept, yet it felt strangely hollow. At 49, Maggie had grown used to quietness, but not to the ache that came with it. Her husband, David, was away again on another work trip. He had been gone so often that his absence had become a kind of presence, predictable, heavy, almost polite. The two of them still spoke every night, but their words had lost color. They exchanged schedules, not stories. When she ended the calls, Maggie would stare at the black screen of her phone until her reflection looked like a stranger's. Rain began to tap lightly against the windows. The garden outside shimmered in shades of gray and green. Maggie reached for the teapot and poured herself another cup, just for the comfort of hearing something pour. She was thinking about taking up painting again, something she hadn't done since her 20s, when the doorbell rang. The sound startled her. It had been hours since she'd heard another human voice. When she opened the door, a tall young man stood on the porch, half smiling beneath the drizzle. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and he held a small brown package in his hands. "Hi, Mrs. Lewis," he said warmly. "I think this was delivered to our house by mistake." It took Maggie a second to recognize him. "Ethan? Ethan Cole?" she asked. He grinned. "Yeah, back from college finally. Thought I'd drop this off before Mom forgets about it." She thanked him, taking the parcel, and for a moment neither of them moved. The rain's soft patter filled the pause. "You must be soaked," she said finally. "Come in for a minute, at least until it slows down." He hesitated, polite but relaxed. "Are you sure? I don't want to bother you." "You're not," she said, already stepping aside. "I was just having tea. You can join me." Inside, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. Ethan glanced around with an easy curiosity. Maggie poured him a cup and motioned toward the small table by the window. They sat opposite each other, the gray light falling gently across the room. "I haven't been in this house since I was a kid," Ethan said with a laugh. "I remember your apple pie. It was legendary." "That was ages ago," she smiled. "Your mother used to send you over with empty plates just to make me bake more." They both laughed softly, and the sound seemed to stretch through the quiet like sunlight finding its way through clouds. The conversation wandered, about his years away, about how the town hadn't changed much, about how strange it felt to be home after chasing dreams elsewhere. He told her he was still figuring out what to do next, that the world outside seemed bigger and noisier than he'd imagined. Maggie listened with genuine interest, asking questions, letting him speak. His voice had a sincerity she missed in her daily life, a kind of openness that didn't need to impress anyone. She realized she was smiling without trying. The teacups emptied, refilled, emptied again. At one point he said, "You know, it's kind of comforting that this street looks exactly the same. Some things shouldn't change." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Sometimes we don't notice how much we change while everything around us stays still." He nodded, quiet for a while, then looked out at the rain. "Maybe that's a good thing. Gives us a chance to come back to ourselves." Her chest tightened slightly at his words. She had spent years waiting for that very feeling, to come back to herself, but she hadn't known where to begin. The rain eased to a mist, and sunlight broke through, scattering reflections across the kitchen tiles. When Ethan finally stood to leave, Maggie found herself reluctant to let the moment end. She walked him to the door. "Tell your mother I'll visit soon," she said. "I will." He smiled again, and there was something in that smile, youth, warmth, maybe just kindness, that lingered after he stepped out into the damp air. Maggie closed the door slowly. The quiet returned, but it felt different, almost companionable. She carried the empty cups to the sink, rinsed them, and stood by the window. Outside, Ethan crossed the street, his figure bright against the silver light. She told herself it was nothing more than neighborly politeness, a pleasant interruption in a dull afternoon. Yet as she wiped her hands and turned off the faucet, she realized she was humming softly. It surprised her. It had been months since any tune had slipped past her lips without effort. The evening crept in. The clock ticked its slow rhythm, and the house smelled of fresh rain. Maggie sat down again, the same spot on the sofa, yet the air felt changed. She reached for her phone and looked at David's last message, flight delayed again. "We'll call tomorrow," she typed "be safe," then stopped, erased it, and simply sent a heart emoji. It felt easier than words. Her eyes drifted to the parcel Ethan had brought. It sat unopened on the table. She didn't even know what was inside, but its presence filled the room with an odd sense of connection, a reminder that the world outside her quiet life still had voices, faces, possibilities. Night settled slowly, bringing with it the familiar weight of solitude. But somewhere beneath it was a small, unfamiliar warmth. She didn't understand it, and she didn't try to name it. For now, it was enough that, for one afternoon, someone had knocked on her door, smiled through the rain, and reminded her that she was still part of the living world. The clock chimed once, gently. Maggie switched off the lights, leaving only the faint glow from the window. As she walked toward her room, the echo of laughter, hers and Ethan's, seemed to follow her down the hallway, soft and harmless, like the memory of sunlight after rain. When the doorbell rang again that night, Rachel already knew who she was hoping to see. She hesitated for a moment before opening the door, trying to keep her voice steady, as though she hadn't been waiting for it. "Good evening again, ma'am," Caleb said, his tone polite, the same warmth in his eyes as before. She smiled faintly. "I guess I've become your regular customer." He laughed softly. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just lucky with timing." The sound of his laughter wasn't loud, it was easy, unguarded. He held the pizza box out, and for a second their fingers brushed as she took it. She noticed the slight chill from outside on his hands. "Cold night," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Winter's coming faster than I expected." "Call me Rachel," she corrected gently. He nodded, then smiled again, more casually now. "All right, Rachel. Have a good evening." She could have closed the door right there. That would have been normal, simple, unremarkable. But something inside her resisted. Her voice came before her thoughts. "Would you like to wait a second? I'll get you a glass of water. You've probably been driving around all evening." He looked surprised but not uncomfortable. "That's kind of you, but I shouldn't." "Just a minute," she said. He hesitated, then nodded politely. "Okay. Thank you." Rachel went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and handed it to him. They stood near the doorway, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound between them. "So, Caleb," she asked, "do you always work this late?" "Most nights," he replied, taking a sip. "I'm saving up for my tuition. It's hard, but I like keeping busy." "Tuition?" "Yes, I'm studying computer engineering at the community college. It's my second year." She smiled. "That's impressive. You sound like you have a plan." He chuckled. "I try to. My mom always said plans keep your heart from getting lost." Rachel nodded, his words sinking deeper than he probably meant them to. "She sounds wise." "She is," he said with a fond look. "She's back home, though. I send her money every month. I just want her to be proud." Rachel felt a wave of warmth and guilt at the same time, warmth for his sincerity, guilt for realizing how far her own life had drifted from such simple clarity. "I think she already is," she said softly. Caleb thanked her and handed back the glass. He looked around, perhaps noticing the quietness of the house. "It's peaceful here," he said. "Sometimes too peaceful," she replied with a faint smile. He tilted his head slightly. "You live alone?" She shook her head. "No. My husband works long hours. He's dedicated." The pause that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just honest. Caleb nodded, understanding something she hadn't said aloud. "I understand. My father used to be like that too. Always busy, always tired. I think he forgot that we needed him even when he was trying to take care of us." Rachel felt something tighten in her chest. "That sounds familiar." They both smiled at the small truth hanging between them, two people from different worlds sharing the same loneliness in different shapes. After a few moments, he checked the time on his phone. "I should probably go. More deliveries waiting." She nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Of course. I didn't mean to keep you." "It was nice talking with you," he said sincerely. "You too, Caleb. Drive safe." When the door closed behind him, the silence felt heavier than before. Rachel stood there, holding the edge of the counter, her heart quiet but restless. She told herself it was nothing. It was just kindness, a moment of conversation in a week of silence. But deep down, she knew she had crossed into a kind of emotional territory she didn't fully understand. The next day at work, she found herself distracted, typing words she didn't read and replaying that short conversation over and over. She wasn't thinking about Caleb as a person, exactly, it was what his presence had reminded her of: warmth, curiosity, the feeling of being seen without being judged. By evening, Ethan came home early for once. He greeted her with a quick nod and asked about dinner. She told him she hadn't decided yet. They ate in near silence, the television filling the gaps in conversation. He talked briefly about deadlines, meetings, and an upcoming trip. She nodded in all the right places, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere. When he finally asked, "You okay? You've been quiet lately," she wanted to say everything, how empty she felt, how the house seemed to echo even when he was home. But instead, she smiled faintly and said, "Just tired." He accepted the answer without question, turning his focus back to his phone. The moment passed like every other moment that week. That night, lying in bed, Rachel stared at the ceiling again. She thought about the simple things Caleb had said, about plans, about family, about being proud. And she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt proud of anything, even of herself. In the soft darkness, she whispered a truth she hadn't dared to face before, that she wasn't searching for someone new. She was searching for herself, the version of her who used to laugh easily, who used to feel alive. But what frightened her most was how close she'd come to mistaking one for the other, and though she promised herself she wouldn't order again, part of her knew that promises made out of guilt rarely last long. The next few days passed in an uneasy haze. Sophia returned to her duties as if nothing had happened, but Derek's face lingered in her thoughts. His words echoed late at night, replaying in a loop she couldn't silence. She had dealt with criminals her entire career, but none had unsettled her like him. Normally, a case would be neatly tied up, arrest made, report filed, justice served. Yet with Derek, there was no closure. He had left her with a choice, a temptation that gnawed at her sense of morality. At work, her colleagues joked in the break room, sharing stories about drunks, traffic stops, and petty thefts. Sophia smiled along, but inside, she felt distracted, restless. When she sat across from her husband Michael at dinner, she noticed how little they spoke. He tapped endlessly on his phone, half listening to her attempts at conversation. He didn't notice her distance, didn't sense the turmoil raging inside her. He was too consumed with quarterly reports and business trips to see that his wife was slipping further from him each day. Sophia caught herself studying Michael's face one night as he slept. Once, she had loved him with unshakable certainty. Now, she saw a stranger lying beside her, a man who barely touched her anymore, except in routine gestures. It wasn't anger she felt, but an ache, an emptiness that left her vulnerable. She hated to admit it, but Derek had cracked something open inside her, something she could no longer ignore. One evening, while driving home, she noticed a figure leaning casually against a lamppost near her street. Her pulse quickened before her eyes confirmed what her instincts already knew: it was Derek. He wasn't hiding this time. He wasn't sneaking around like a thief. He stood there openly, as though he belonged in her neighborhood, waiting for her. Against her better judgment, she slowed her car and pulled over. He walked toward her with the same calm confidence that had unsettled her before. She rolled the window down halfway, keeping her voice sharp. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you," he said simply. "You didn't call the cops. That tells me something." "You're playing a dangerous game," she warned. "Maybe," he admitted. "But so are you." His boldness infuriated her, yet it also stirred something she didn't want to name. She should have told him to leave, but instead, she let the silence stretch between them. Finally, she unlocked the passenger door. He slid into the seat without hesitation. They drove aimlessly for a while, the hum of the engine filling the spaces between them. Derek told her bits of his story, how he had lost his job, how debts had pushed him into desperation, how he hated what he had become. His words weren't excuses, they were confessions. And Sophia, against all reason, listened with empathy. "You don't seem like a thief," she said quietly. "I'm not," he replied. "At least, I don't want to be. But life has a way of pushing people into corners." She glanced at him, catching the sincerity in his eyes. It unsettled her even more than his audacity. This wasn't a man defined only by his mistakes. There was something raw and human in him, something that mirrored her own quiet desperation. They parked by a quiet stretch near the river. The city lights shimmered on the water, casting shifting reflections. The air was cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. Sophia knew she shouldn't be there, shouldn't be alone with him, but she didn't move. Derek leaned back, his gaze never leaving her. "You've got everything," he said softly. "A career, a home, a husband. But you don't look happy." Her breath caught. "You don't know me." "Maybe I don't," he admitted. "But I know what it looks like when someone's starving inside." His words struck her like a blow. She turned away, staring at the rippling water, trying to steady her thoughts. She wanted to argue, to push him away, but deep down, she knew he was right. The silence between them grew heavier, charged with unspoken tension. When Derek reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against hers, she didn't pull away. The simple touch sent a jolt through her, awakening something she had long buried. It wasn't the touch of a thief or a stranger, it was the touch of someone who saw her in a way Michael hadn't in years. Sophia closed her eyes, torn between reason and desire. She thought about her vows, about her badge, about the life she had built on discipline and control. But all of that felt distant, almost irrelevant, in this stolen moment. She felt alive, trembling with a dangerous excitement she hadn't felt in so long. When she finally turned back to him, their eyes met, and she knew she had already crossed a line. The world outside, the law, her marriage, her reputation, faded into the background. What remained was the heat of temptation, the intoxicating pull of secrecy. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper barely louder than the wind. "This can't happen," she said, though her actions betrayed her words. "Then why are you here?" Derek asked, his tone low, steady, almost challenging. Sophia had no answer. She only knew that in that moment, for reasons she couldn't explain, she didn't want to stop. Later, when she finally drove home, her hands still trembled on the steering wheel. Michael was already asleep, the house quiet and unchanged, as though nothing unusual had happened. But Sophia knew everything had changed. She slipped into bed beside her husband, her heart still pounding, her mind replaying the forbidden thrill of what she had just allowed. She told herself it was a mistake, a one-time lapse, a secret she could bury. Yet deep down, she sensed it was only the beginning. Derek had awakened something inside her that could no longer be silenced.